Good afternoon, and welcome to Research in Action, brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. My name is Karen Scapinato. I will be today's moderator. And before we get started, please know that if you have a question for today's speaker, please use the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. If you scroll your mouse there, you will see a Q&A icon. If you click on that, you can type a question in a little pop-up window. You can type a question at any time during the presentation today. We will go through them at the end of the presentation today. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ashley Rivera. Dr. Rivera is not known for being a wallflower. She believes in the power of a positive attitude and a smile. Her practice experience includes very many things, including pediatric hospice, liver transplant, medical surgical high-risk pregnancy, diabetic education and telemetry, and she started her healthcare journey as an EMT, but came to love nursing for the continuation of care aspects. Currently, she is an assistant professor at Florida Atlantic University and has more than 7 years of experience as an educator. In 2019, she graduated from her Ph.D. program after developing her theory, Caregiving in Fathers. She has a strong love for community health and nursing education in all levels. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to today's speaker, Dr. Rivera.
Hi, everyone. So I am Ashley Rivera. Everything good over there on your side, Karen? You can see the screen?
Yes, looks great. Thanks.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Just before I start, I'd like to make sure all good. So like she said, I have a lot that I have to talk about with you guys today. And I want to share what I've been working on. And it's really about this idea of supporting fathers as caregivers. And what we're going to get to today is I want to talk about three main things. I want to talk about the role that men play in caregiving, the inspiration for men to engage in caregiving, and really this idea of a non-gendered approach to caregiving in families. But before we get into that, let's talk about how I got here. Because when I started, that wasn't where I was going. When I started, I was really looking at family functioning in families of children with medical fragility. And I was challenged to do this because I have a child with medical fragility. And that's where I wanted to study. But while I was looking at this idea, I kind of got challenged at one point, and they said, but how can you compare family functioning in these families if you don't know what's normal? And I said, okay, well, let me look at the research, what's normal. And let me tell you, there's a lot of information out there on family functioning. And so when I was looking at all this information, the one thing I noticed is that there's a lot of data out there on moms. There's a lot of data out there on kids. And there's a lot of data out there on grandparents and caregivers and extended members of the family. But there wasn't a lot of data on dad. There wasn't a lot of information on dad. And so when I looked at dad, I figured out that the information that was there on dad, a lot of it was focused on what I call the triple A's. And the triple A's is absenteeism, abandonment, and abuse. We didn't have a lot of data about the good stuff. And so I said to myself, well, who's going to study the good stuff? Who's going to tell us about all the great things and the good things that dads can do? And I said, well, there's nothing like you yourself, girl. And so that's how I ended up where I am, is I want to talk about the good stuff. And I wanted to show you this statue right here. It's a very mass-produced statue, and this line of work of it. And I said, this moment right here is what I want to focus on. This moment when this man looks down at this child and says, you are now my whole world. And that's what I want to look at. I want to look at this guy that says, I'm going to do anything for this kid. I'm going to take care of this child. I'm going to be the caregiver. And that's what's important, because we can't look at why things are bad, those triple A's, if we don't know what a good thing looks like. We have to know why the good thing happens and when the good thing happens and what a good thing looks like before we can look and say what's not good. And this is where my research comes in. This is my stronghold, guys, is the goals of the original study. And when I looked at this original study, I really wanted to look at the social process of caregiving. Where's this good stuff? When is it happening? And when is it happening out in the world where we can see it? And what influences exist on caregiving? What tells people, yes, you can be a caregiver? And what tells people no and makes them walk away from that moment, that engagement with that child? But to do this, I had to learn a lot of things. The first thing I had to learn was, what does the word father mean? And traditionally, when you look at a lot of research studies, you're looking at this idea of a father as somebody that's biologically related. Now, I don't know about you, but in our world today, biology is something that's very, very small amount of fathers. Right now in our world today, the father can be almost anybody, from a football coach to another parent to a caregiver. It could be a single mom taking on both roles as a mother and a father. But what makes a father different? And so I came up with this definition of a father, of the postmodern father. And a postmodern father is someone who's committed to making that well-being of that child better. That's it. That's all it takes to be a dad, is just be somebody committed to the well-being of the child, because every kid could use a father in their lives, and they don't have to be biological. And that's a really, really important part for me, is that it's really important that we know that sometimes you need a father, and sometimes you need a lot of fathers. All right. Nothing wrong with having a couple of them in your life. The next step that I had to learn was, how do I get recruitment? Because what I noticed in a lot of studies is that whenever we talk about recruiting dads, and all the data I looked at, they'll say that they did a research article on parents, but instead of parents, they've done 11 moms and 1 dad. It wasn't very proportional. So how do I get guys to talk to me? And, the original start is that you get their wives to tell them to talk to you. Well, that didn't work for very long, because what happened is I actually wanted to talk to the dads who were also single dads too. I wanted to talk to the dads who are doing it on their own and trucking through. They're just making it work. They put on their hard hat and their boots and they went to it. What gets done, gets done. And so I had to really work on this recruitment part. And what I found out is that if you get one guy to talk to you, he'll probably have one friend he can refer you to talk to him. And he'll say, this is the one guy I feel comfortable with you talking to, because he'll tell you to you straight. He and I have these kinds of conversations. And that one friend leads to another friend, because it's not an easy community to access, which explains a lot why there wasn't a whole lot of research on it either, because it wasn't easy. And it did take a little time to get guys to talk to me. But they do. Just patience. All right. The last piece is analysis. How am I going to put all these pieces together to figure out a theory? And I used what's called a constructivist grounded theory model. And what was really great with the constructivist grounded theory model is that I was able to pull everything apart and use what we already know about theory. I used a theoretical model called Swanson's theory of caring. It's a very big model. It just takes a positive light on caring and caregiving and takes away that negative connotation that a lot of times we associate with caregiving. That can be something that can happen a lot because it's treated like a chore, like a duty. I wanted to look at fathers that were caregiving because they wanted to, because they were caring, because they were part of it. Because remember, a lot of that research was on the AAAs, and I didn't want to go back to the AAAs. I wanted to reinforce that idea that they're caregiving because they want to, because they're committed to, not because anybody made them do it. The next learning opportunity I had was dissemination. Once I finished this story, and I still do it to this day, I want to talk to everybody and tell everybody all about it. And that's what laid me here, to research and action. But the other part of this is that these stories that I've collected, they deserve to be told. They deserve to be heard, because they're not unique stories. It's that I hear the same patterns of language over and over again, these same struggles, these same ideas, these same goals and ambitions. I hear them over and over again. So if they're there over and over again, and every time I present, there's always one person that tells me, I never thought of it like that. And that keeps me going, because once somebody tells me they've never thought about it like that, that means I haven't talked to enough people about it. I haven't talked to enough people about how important this topic is in the world. And so I keep presenting. Now, it's really important for me to understand and let you know where this study went, right? I had made a goal for this study to get 10 participants or so. That was the original goal. I ended up with 35 because, again, I kept talking to their friends. And if somebody came to me and said they wanted to talk to me and be a part of this study, I was not turning them down. I did reach theoretical saturation at 15, which means that I was able to figure out all the patterns and all the stories pretty early on. But I wanted all the details. And those extra 20 people gave me so many details. They gave me so many stories, and every single one of their stories was so valid. What's really important in this chart, I want you to see the average age was 45, but I had dads that were 17 years old, and I had dads that were, he was a little bit over 80. He was 82 years old. Average number of children is 2.4, but I had some dads with one kid, and I had one dad with 6 kids. And these dads had such a different range of marital statuses. You know, the majority were married. Remember, I started with strong arm and wives, and wives strong arming their husbands into things. But I got a really good portion of these divorced, these widows, these single dads. And it's crazy because their data was all the same. Their stories had similar themes and runs, and they talked about a lot of the same things. It didn't matter what their marital status was. Their concerns were very similar. Ethnicity, this was a very multi-ethnic study. I'm sure you can see by that. I talked to all different kinds of people. Really important part of that ethnicity piece was that I did go to community centers within diverse communities. So I was able to get a lot of people that were from diverse populations, as well as going to religious centers. One of the people that was participated in my study was a pastor. So he was able to get a lot of people for me that he could talk to, that he said, you know, this guy talks to me about this stuff a lot. Why don't you talk to him? Same thing with religion. Religion was a little skewed toward the Christian side, but I think we're still a little skewed in the whole world. So I think that's pretty representative of the population. Have a couple people I missed in there, but that's okay. Something to look forward to the next time. Educational range was really broad. I really loved how broad and diverse my educational range is. This isn't just people with Ph.D s that I was talking to. I was talking to everybody. And then that employment level. It's really important for me that you understand that employment level, this wasn't just people who are working professionals. These are people that were unemployed or part-time. I did have some retired ones, especially some of my older dads were retired. And that was really important that we got to see all these things. But enough about who I talked to. Let's talk about their stories. And I like to use this word participant language. And this comes from that model of research that I did. This participant language really centers on the fact of using the words that people gave to me. And when they told me their stories, what they said. And this, I always knew. I had some dads that said that they always knew they wanted to be a father, that was their goal in life. They always wanted to be a father. They always said that was something I dreamed up as a little boy. I had fathers that they looked at their child and said, I wouldn't survive without this child. I had a father tell me a story about when his wife left him and she took the child. And he said he just stared at that empty crib at night and said, I knew I had to get her back because I wasn't going to survive this otherwise. He wasn't going to survive without his child there. And that was a really important moment for me to see that passion. And what's really important about this dad too is it was a dad that never thought he would have children, because that's part of it. These guys are just as valid as people who always wanted to be a father. And that's what makes being father worth it. These dads would talk about all the struggle they had to go through to kind of fill those little Maslow hierarchy of needs, making sure there was a roof on the head, that there was enough money, that there was food on the table for these children. They said all that stress from going to a job I hated. But when they would come home at night and their kids would just be waiting at the front door for them, that was when they knew that being a father was worth it. That was when they would come home and they would let everything melt off their body and get down on the floor and crawl around and play games with their children. A lot of our fathers talked about, I didn't realize what it was before kids. They didn't realize what love was before kids. They thought they had an idea, but they just said, once I had kids, I realized what that unconditional love meant. And they always knew the concept was there, but they just didn't realize what it meant. It really made a personal connection to them. And one of the hardest things for some of these dads is this idea, if I was allowed. There were things that either physically or by culture, or that they felt they weren't allowed to do as fathers. Things that they thought that they wanted to do, that they had a feeling that they could do these, but they weren't given that chance. They weren't given the opportunity. And it really comes down to them finding the balance. It's about finding the balance. And that's what they say. They say, you know what? Everybody's experiences is so different. But when you find that balance, when you find that place that says, yes, I can do this. I found that balance between what I'm allowed and what I'm not allowed. And the big part is your experience is only what you make it. And that is very profound to me. This idea that what kind of father you're going to be, what kind of father you're going to do, what kind of things you're going to do with your kid, it's up to you. It's up to you in the long run. That's how a lot of these dads felt. Because the heart of it is that nothing gets in their way unless they let it. And this was a resounding feeling throughout there, that if they wanted to be with their kids, they were going to find any way possible to do it. But there is a sad part to this story, because when we're talking about this story, these dads would often tell me that when they were trying to figure out how to get engaged, how to get through that, if I was allowed, that they were having really hard trouble finding the resources that told them how to get that help, how to be there, how to learn how to do little things like changing a diaper or dealing with a massive blowout at the swimming pool. All of those resources that are on the internet for parenting, they felt as if they're directed at mothers. They felt a lot of those resources don't really take into account their feelings. They felt like when they went to doctor's appointments, that it felt like daddy doesn't exist. They felt like even all through the pregnancy that they would just check in on mom and the baby, but they would never check in on dad. That they wouldn't check in and say, hey, how are you doing, daddy? I have stories of dads that would go to the ER with their child with a broken arm, and they would sit there with the triage nurse, you know, that first nurse you see, and they're telling her about the broken arm. And the nurse's first response to them, when's mom coming? Those moments made them feel like they didn't exist. Those moments were the hardest and the toughest. So here's where we ended up. After all these stories, I came up with what's called the theory of caregiving in fathers. And it's all about intentional action. Because these men said the most important thing you can do is to do something. So how they do intentional action is that first thing that fathers want to reconcile with their past. They want to reinvent that kitchen table. This kitchen table is this idea of when we come home at night in a very traditional family, that everybody sits around the kitchen table and tells stories to each other. They have that communication and that connection. And this was something that fathers very, very much strive to do, is that whether they had good communication in their own families growing up, or they had really poor communication growing up as a child, they felt that communication was the most important thing. They wanted to have that. And, you know, reconciling the fact that they couldn't have that kitchen table that they had when they were a kid. They couldn't have that. Their schedules were too busy. Everybody was too busy. Oftentimes, everybody's rushing out of the house to activities, and it's hard to get everybody to sit in one place. So these dads talked about taking that kitchen table idea and moving it to somewhere where they're always together. They would talk about purposefully going out of their way to pick up their kids at their sports activities so they could have that cute 15, 20-minute window in the car to talk to their kids, because that was their time to connect. And making an effort to make sure that they had those times to connect. Hopefully daily, but at least on a weekly basis, especially as those kids got older and they had more activities and it was harder to connect with them. But that idea of connection and communication was a very, very big part of their intentional actions that these fathers wanted to take part in. The second part of their intentional actions is creating a home. Fathers were very, very adamant about this fact that they wanted their kids to have a home. They wanted their kids to grow up in the type of home that they wished they had growing up. That was very important to them. I have stories of fathers that moved once they found out that they were having a child. They said, I knew that once she got pregnant that I said, we have to move. We have to find a new place. We have to find better schools. We have to find a community where we can go and then we can walk to the park. A lot of them liked walking to the park with their children. A lot of them talked about this idea of doing activities with their children and having their children raised in a place where they felt their child would be safe. Big part of that creating a home is safety and feeling like it's a place they want to come back to. They didn't want the home to be a negative place. They want the home to be a place where the kids come home and take a deep breath and let it go and let it all out. They wanted their kids to feel like that was their place of comfort. And that was very important to fathers. The next thing that was very important for fathers was this idea of empowerment. Now, there's two different ways of thinking about this word, this power word. And, I think people always jump to this idea of power as something that's being controlled and being something that's holding people down. This is not the way that this word is being used at all. When we're talking about empowerment, in this sense, we're talking about empowerment in the way that they could overcome the obstacles that have been placed in front of them. Remember how we were talking about those barriers that fathers have to getting engaged in caregiving? Empowerment was going back to this idea that we can overcome these obstacles, that what our obstacles stand in the way between us and being with our kids and taking care of our kids and impacting their well-being, I can find my way to it. I can make it over that hurdle. I can do this. And that's what empowerment was all about for these fathers. Empowerment was about saying, I don't have to do it the same way that my father did, or people told me I needed to do it. I can do it in my own way. I can make fatherhood my journey, my experience. That is the idea behind empowerment here, is that the future could be whatever they wanted to make it to be. And that idea that they can do anything they want. Now, since we just touched on it, let's talk about those influences. Now, caregiving and those actions of caregiving, it's really important to me to understand that idea that what people actually do in caregiving is different based upon cultural. It's very, very important that that those things that we see fathers doing, they can all be different, but the intention behind them is still the same. And that intention is always for the well-being of the child. All right. And now, while we have those caregiving actions, the display of what actions we're going to see depends a lot on these barriers and passages. So what we're actually going to see from those intentions depends on what's around them. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the things that make it hard for them, the barriers. Things that cause barrier are culture, control, particularly when the fathers are not in control, especially when things happen where they can't control how much time they can be with their children. Things like limited rights, things like limited visitation, things like not being able to get to their children because of work, because of issues that they have to take care of, that they need to take, that are taking away their time, things that are controlling them are taking them away. On that same level, it's exhaustion. It's spending those long, long hours at work. And while you really want to come home and play with your kids, you are at the end of your rope and you need a minute. And that idea of exhaustion as being a barrier, they talk about this idea that if they're exhausted, they can't be the kind of father they want to be. They've got to recharge those batteries first so they can come out and engage with their children in the way that they want to engage. But that can be hard too because of preoccupation. When there's other things going on in your life and there's external things going on, maybe you've got a big deadline coming up. Maybe you're getting a lot of pressure at work from your boss. Maybe you're having a lot of fights with your wife or your girlfriend and you're preoccupied. those things stand in the way of you being able to deliver those caregiving actions to your children. Now that we've talked about the bad, let's talk with the good. Good things that do help fathers. The expectation is there that they be there for their children. That expectation that says, hey, I'm not doing this alone. That helps fathers get engaged. At the same time, fathers talked about designing their lifestyles around their kid. Some fathers talked about working different jobs or taking a pay cut because they realized their kid didn't need to do every single sport out there, that they didn't need to make millions and millions of dollars to keep their kid happy. Their kid would be so much happier if they made less money but spent more time with them. And that idea of designing their lifestyles to support that idea. Support. Fathers do a whole lot better when they feel like somebody's got their back. When somebody says, you can do this in the background. That's what dads need. They need somebody in the background to cheerlead them on a little bit, right? They need somebody to say, we can do this, because we all do better when somebody says you can do this, dads included. And that idea of love. Now, this love is that love between the parent and the child. This is that love between a father and its child. This goes back to the statue where this dad just looks into this child's eyes and realizes that kid's got their whole heart. That kid's got their whole world is right there between those little eyes. And that leads fathers to taking care of things. That leads fathers into those caregiving actions. Now, we've talked a lot about dads, but I want to make sure that we reiterate that approach, that it's a non-gendered approach. This idea that caregiving for so long has been owned by women, that caregiving for so long was something that was not allowed for men to engage in, or something that was discouraged. Now, guys, we're in 2022. We are post-pandemic. All right. We know that unpaid caregiving is one of the biggest barriers to gender equality in the world. We've had this great movement where we bring women out into the workforce, but we have to have that reciprocal movement to push everybody back into the house and say, everybody's going to work, but everyone also needs to take care of the home. Everyone also needs to be able to take care of their kids. And we need to correct that course. We need to decrease those barriers so whoever's supposed to be the right person to take care of that kid is able to take care of that job. And that's really important because that includes all of our LGBTQ plus people. All right. That really important part is that this isn't about the people who are doing the caregiving. The priority is the well-being of children. It's about making sure kids get what they need to succeed. It's about making sure that kids have everything and every opportunity because somebody is taking care of it, that they're not left out there to fend for themselves because somebody's willing to take on that job. And it doesn't matter who it is. It's just about making sure that everyone has the tools to feel that they are capable and able to take on that role. So from here's the opportunities. This is where we are in the research. So the big one that I've made a lot of progress on is this share the stories. But I'm working developing the resources and spreading the message of these fathers and this idea of caregiving in fathers. Now, sharing the stories. I do presentations because I love them. I like to talk locally. I like to talk nationally. I like to talk internationally. Remember that piece about me not being a wallflower? I talk all day long. I don't know how I still have a voice sometimes. And I think other people agree. I'm also working on publishing. I have gotten my background information on toxic masculinity published. The theory of caregiving in fathers itself is actually under review at a journal right now. And barriers and passages to caregiving, that's still in development. It's on its way. And right here, doing that research in action right now. Now, as far as developing the resources, this is a really exciting thing for me. When I talk about developing the resources, I always like to say that the goal is to have a Super Bowl commercial because I want to increase that positive imagery of fathers. I want to see bus benches. I want to see ads. I want to see a Super Bowl commercial of a Clydesdale and a polar bear walking around with their little children, because that's what needs to happen. We need to make this socially acceptable. I want to create a TikTok challenge with show me how you're taking care of your kids. These are the kinds of things I want. I want to see these things out there. That positive imagery of fathers inside of our world needs to be seen, because there's a lot of boys and girls that grow up without a father in their lives. And that's something that we need to control, because just because you don't have a father in your life doesn't mean you can't grow up to be the greatest father ever. I had one participant once tell me about the story about how he didn't have a father in his life. And the idea for what a father should be came from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Yes, TV. He watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air over and over, and he saw the way that Phil interacted with Will. He saw the way this uncle stepped in when his father wasn't there for him. He saw the way that Phil stepped in when Will's father walked out of his life, and Will felt like nobody wanted him and nobody loved him. But Phil stepped up to the challenge, and he said to himself, I want to be Phil. I want to be the man that says, I'm there for you. If no one else is there for you, I got you, kid. And that was very important to me, because every little boy and every little girl needs to see that someone's got their back. Now, on that front, we've got to get some resources out there for our dads that are not targeted at moms. We need to have something that's accessible, informative, fun, and engaging. That's something that's very important to me that we develop this. And I just started with a program from the National Science Foundation called iCourse. It's here at FAU. And we're making what's called Ask Daddysaurus. And I'll give you a little business thesis here on Daddysaurus, is that this is a media-based avatar targeted at parents to provide a fun and engaging content on childcare in very short chunks of content to save time, energy, and cut down on the search through parenting literature for topics that are useful in real life. Because let's face it, there's a lot of data out there. And it's just like when you're looking for a recipe and you have to read 4 pages of content before you get to the actual recipe. I just want to post the actual recipe. The plan for Daddysaurus is that he's going to have a website. He's going to be an active avatar that you can ask questions to and get real answers to. And you can get links to information if you want to read more. But the point is that he's there for you, that it's something that you can do. I'd also like Daddysaurus to have a TikTok and an Instagram. Now, the next part of this campaign is spreading the message. So we're working really hard on spreading the message over there. Right now, I'm working on these Family United networking experience exhibits, fun exhibits. These are like fun houses. And right now we're in the middle of writing for a grant for it. We've got a LOI that we're submitting to PCORI. And this idea is that it's a community engagement area. And the focus for this first fun exhibit that we're going to use is maternal and infant mortality, and focusing on caregiving from the point that it's the whole family, this family caregiving idea on this early part of pregnancy and postpartum care and infant care. So all those areas, the very initial part, that's what the point of those is to do, is to really get people engaged and understanding that cultural and linguistic expression of those ideas, and just to get people talking, to get people involved. Part of that spreading the message is I currently serve on the Fetal Infant Mortality Review Board. And on this board, what I do is I actually have a role in both the case review team and the community action group. In the case review team, we look at all the reasons that babies pass in Palm Beach County, whether in utero or after they're born. And what really got me into this board here is that when I started, there was only one question ever asked about fathers when their babies died. And that question was Daddy there? Now, I don't know about anybody else, but to reduce a person to a yes or no question doesn't sit well with me. That's something that I struggle with. And so I got really involved on this part. And I also joined their community action group. And that community action group is striving and working to find a way to keep that education alive. Sorry, 1 second. To keep that education alive, to get the community involved in making differences in why infants and babies died. And that's all I've really got to say.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And just as a reminder, if anybody has a question for today's presenter, please use the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen. You can type your question there and we'll go through them as they come in. Ashley, a question. You mentioned the relationship of fathers to their children and how they feel, and also how they feel when even when a father first thinks that they do not want a child. Yet then when the child is born, they very much enjoy it, right? Does that perception and that relationship also changes? I would think it changes with the age of the child. Can you talk a little bit about how that might change and how that relationship progresses as the child ages from infant to, let's say, teenage years? You're muted, Ashley, you're muted.
Sorry, when I took off the screen share, I muted myself. So when we're talking about the way that this relationship changes, it's really about this idea that the relationship is going to grow and change and develop, and how that relationship ends up. Remember that it's a two-way street. When somebody's an infant and when somebody's a baby, you can love them so much with all your heart, but they're still going to grow up to be a distinct individual. And the one thing that dads have learned is that, and they say it, they call it the age of 10. This is what these dads, a lot of them said to me. They said, by the age of 10, I've built my relationship with my child. And after that, the relationship is up to both of us to maintain. But I just have to know that by the time I made it to 10, that I did everything I could to be part of that child's life. And it's not to say that fathers can't come in later on, but it's got to be a two-way street, because you can't force that relationship. That relationship becomes, again, that two-way street. That child just as much wants to have you in there as you want to be in it.
Yeah, definitely true. I have teenage children. There's still, even though it's changing, it has changed over, I want to say, the last couple of decades for sure, where the average fathers are getting more involved in general, I would say, and I'm generalizing here, but there still seems to be a bit of a stigma out there, right? Let's say somebody has a stay-home dad, or even if a dad takes their daughter on a work day to a playground or something like that. What can we do as the public to get rid of this kind of stigma, where it's still unusual if to have a stay-home dad, or even take your child to the playground if you're a dad?
I'll tell you that one of the most important things is that these dads get out there in the world. And I've had dads talk about this idea of, say, the story of the one dad in the swimming pool, that he wanted his daughter to learn how to swim. And he took her to the swimming pool, and he felt as if the mother, is a weekday class. So it was a weekday class. And he felt as if the mothers in the pool were waiting for him to mess up. Well, I don't know if you know a lot about infant swimming, but when they swallow a bunch of water, sometimes they poop. And that poop is a lot. And this poor dad, towards the end of the swimming lesson, was dealing with a massive blowout. And he felt like the mothers were sitting in the corner watching him, waiting for him, kind of like vultures, sort of, that they were waiting for him to mess up. They were waiting to see if he could handle this blowout, like it was some kind of parenting test. And, I think the most important thing is not that we go out and say to these dads, hey, you're doing a great job, because while that's a good action, the thing should be that it's a non-gendered approach. they're the best one taking care of that kid right now.
Mhm.
So don't call it dad's babysitting the kid today. It's just being a parent. Let
Yeah.
him be a parent. Let him take his kid to the park. Let him play with the other kids at the park. Heck, I don't want to have to push the swing any more than anybody else. Let him do it. It's like free gym work for him. And he'll love it. He'll love it. He'll love it that nobody looks at him when he walks in the playground. He'll love it that nobody treats him any different. Engage like you would with any other parent. And that's exactly what it comes down to.
Yeah. True equity, right?
Absolutely. True equity.
Yeah, and that actually gets me to my next question here. Have you found in your research a different daddy image between ethnic groups, for instance, Hispanic father image versus any other ethnic groups? Very interesting question.
Right. So that cultural expression, again, what I said about the caregiving behaviors, that what we see can be a little bit different based upon culture, but the intention is very similar. So while the intention's there, sometimes we do see some differences between them. Now, what's interesting though, is that a lot of that traditional toxic masculinity stuff is very, very strong in a lot of our ethnic minority groups. It's a lot tougher for ethnic minority men to break out of that shell because it's been so ingrained within their cultures. So those cultures tend to not be as progressive towards that role of that father involvement in caregiving. And that can be a little bit troublesome. And it can be really, really tough. There was a dad that his wife passed, and he worked as an oil rigger. And so oil riggers, when they go to work, they go away for months at a time. And when his wife died, he left the oil rig. And he said, I became a stay-at-home dad. And he was Jamaican. And in that culture, that's not something you do. But he said, my wife couldn't be there and I wanted to do what she wanted for our kids. And he said, I know everybody looked at me like I had 3 kids. I know that everybody made fun of me and made names. But he goes, my connection with my children was so much more important because that was how I honored my wife. And he said, we had enough money to get by for a long time. I didn't need to keep making money. Somebody needed to be there with their kids, and it needed to be their dad, not their grandma, not their aunt. I was going to make sure it was done. And this idea of these people that have that empowerment, that find the strength to overcome the barriers, I'm telling you, he made that decision because he had the support behind him. He made that decision because someone in his family told him, if that's what you need to do it. There was somebody on that oil rig that he talked to that said, you know what? If it was me, I'd go home. And that's what he listened to.
Yeah, your environment, I'm sure, is very important in that regard, and what kind of support you get from your environment. And I think that's the part where we all can help, right? Where we all can provide that kind of supportive environment to anybody. Speaking of divorced or widowed fathers, are there any particular resources or any particular thoughts you have on how to assist them better? I mean, that's an additional challenge, right? Because I don't have the second parent in addition to just being a father. Now you're missing the second parent in addition to that, right? Are there any particular recommendations or thoughts you have on that regard?
I do have a lot of thoughts on that. And it comes back to support, and it really does. Just because somebody does end up with a divorce, does end up being a widowed father, that doesn't mean that they can't provide that same nurturing environment to a child. And you can equate it to that idea of a single mother. At a single mother, we'd throw everything on her and wouldn't think twice about it. But why can't we do the same thing as that equality piece for a dad? He could do it. But the other thing is that I don't believe that children truly grow up in single parent households. I also don't believe that happens either. Because when you're a single mother raising a child, there's usually a village involved. And the same thing should be there for those dads. There should be a village there. There should be someone that says, I got you. We hear all these stories about single mothers and their children are involved in sports. I have a very good friend that was a football coach. And as a football coach, he became a dad to a lot of those players that were from single mother households. He became their dad. He didn't have to have a biological or a legal relationship to these child. This child just needed someone to stand up and say, you could do this. And so he took on that role. I've had one of the fathers I talked to became that way for his brother because his family migrated to the US. And when they immigrated over, what happened is that the parents didn't speak any English. So who was going to go to these parent-teacher conferences? Who was going to make sure that this kid got what they needed to succeed in school? He was going to do it. And that's that thing with single parenthood, is that the most important thing is being a single parent, whether you're a man or a woman, is that you've got a village. You've got other people that you can rely on to help get those gaps that you can't get to. You have that child in a place where somebody's got that child's best interest at heart, but I guarantee you there's somebody else there. And building that village, building that community of support, having those resources available is the most important thing. And we're starting to see outcroppings, a lot of these little support groups. And I'll talk about support groups just for a second, because it is kind of a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, is that we have so many support groups that are labeled as parenting support groups, but they're really mother support groups. And I've had dads talk about this idea of showing up at a parenting support group and getting looked at like they had 3 heads. And he said, but it says parenting support group. I'm here for parenting. I have a 3-month-old and I can't get it to eat without vomiting all over me. And the doctor says she's fine, but I don't feel like she's fine. And I want to talk to other people who have that experience. So if we're going to label something as parenting, let's truly get that parenting piece in. Let's make it accessible. Let's make it available. Let's do that true equity.
Yeah, very true. Speaking of true equity, as relationships and the way we operate change, there are some examples now where the mother is the person who's a full-time worker, and I mentioned earlier stay-home dads. Have there been any comparisons being made? And that often is being still viewed as kind of like, what, you're not staying with your children, right? As a mother, the expectations that are sometimes still, especially in the older generation, I would say, still behind, that the mother is supposed to be staying home with a child than the father. Have there been any comparisons between the mother stepping up and being the full-time breadwinner, if you like, those that are going to work and stay-home dads versus the opposite of it? Have there been comparisons in between those kind of environments?
There actually has been quite a few. Actually, there's quite a few studies out there about female breadwinners, and that idea that, when you have somebody that's meant to be a caregiver, and let me tell you now, not everybody is meant to be a caregiver. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. There are some people who are just not meant to care for other people. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in these situations, it's about finding out who's the best person to be home with this kid. And at the same time, if the mother is at a critical point in her career, because that's one of the things we found, and that one of that big barriers to career advancement and why there's such a pay gap between the genders, is that when a woman is at a big point in her career and she has a baby and she stops her career to raise that baby, there's no gaining back. There's no coming back in the same level.
Yeah.
But when we have men that say, my career is stable, my career is good, it's not going anywhere, you make way more money than me, please keep working, I'll take care of everything at home. It's about divide and conquer. And it's about figuring out who the best person is to take care of that job. And if the mom's the best person to take care of that job, let her be the person to take care of that job. And if the dad is, then let them be the best person to take care of the job. Again, that comes down to the fact that it's about the well-being of those kids. It's about who's going to be the best one to take care of these kids and provide them with that nurturing place that you want them to be. Who's going to give them that home? And who's going to be good at it? Because honestly, in this world, we don't raise people to be caregivers anymore. Everybody wants to go to college and everybody wants to get millions of degrees and everybody wants to have all these things. We don't ever raise people to be housewives anymore. I can tell you now, having an 18-year-old myself, I could probably trust him with the microwave, but I'm not sure what else. But I'll tell you, my daughter's the exact same way. She can maybe scramble an egg. And I think she only learned to scramble an egg so she would survive college. But otherwise, everything else is debatable. And no, the truth is that a lot of those skills and things are going by the wayside. This is why we see a lot of these collapses of these things, like if you go into a business like fabric stores or sewing machines or crafts, even craft stores, how many of them have disappeared and are now only available on the internet, right?
Yeah.
How many of them are not available anymore because there's not somebody staying home and doing all these things?
Yep, very much so. But it all comes back, as you already mentioned earlier, to equity, right? Let's treat everybody has the same skills. We're all arguably born with the same innate skills in that regard. So, why not treat everybody equitable? Okay, that was all our questions. Thank you very much, Ashley. And we hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope you see you again at our next Research in Action. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.